take a look at this cave. It goes by the name Sawney Bean's Cave. From the outside, it sits quietly against a rocky Scottish cliff, surrounded by coastline that is genuinely beautiful. The scenery around it gives no indication of what the cave is associated with. That association happens to be one of the most disturbing and debated stories in Scottish history. As always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. In 1977, horror director Wes Craven released his second feature film, The Hills Have Eyes. Craven had already made a name for himself with his 1972 debut, The Last House on the Left, and audiences were curious about what he had been developing in the years since. The Hills Have Eyes delivered. It pulled in $25 million at the box office, attracted significant controversy from critics who found it excessively brutal, and gradually built a devoted following that turned it into a genre landmark. A remake followed in 2006. The premise follows an American family on a road trip in the 1970s. While traveling through a remote stretch of Nevada desert, they ignore a warning from a local gas station attendant to stay on the main road. Their vehicle leaves the highway and crashes, and from that point, something living in the caves of the surrounding hills begins hunting them. Craven did not invent this scenario from nothing. While researching material after his first film, he came across a historical account so disturbing that he used it as the foundation for his next project. That account was the story of the Sawney Bean clan. The precise details of Alexander Bean's early life are not well documented, but historians generally place his birth in Scotland sometime during the late 15th century. He was known by the shortened name Sawney. His father worked as a hedge trimmer and ditch digger, and like most sons of the era, Sawney was expected to follow the same path. He did not. By his father's account, and by all surviving descriptions, Sawney had no interest in work of any kind. He preferred to spend his time doing as little as possible, a trait that caused significant tension with his father, despite repeated attempts to redirect him. At some point in his adult years, Sawney encountered a woman named Black Agnes Douglas. Agnes was, at the time of their meeting, facing accusations of witchcraft and was actively looking for a way out of her situation. The two recognized in each other a shared desire to leave behind the expectations of ordinary life, and they departed together for the coastal county of Ayrshire on the western edge of Scotland. They had no real plan beyond the relocation itself. What they found, however, was a place to live that still exists today. Located at the northern end of Balcruchan Bay, approximately 5 kilometers north of the village of Ballantrae, sits what appears from the outside to be little more than a narrow crack in a rocky cliff face. It is easy to walk past without a second look, but it is not a crack. It is the entrance to a raised cave that extends far into the cliff. Sawney Bean's cave sits at the high tide mark. When the tide comes in, the lower section of the entrance floods. For Sawney and Agnes, this was not a drawback. They made their home in the deeper interior, where the tunnels extend approximately 590 feet, around 180 meters, into the rock, with corridors running a total length of roughly 1 mile. The flooding at high tide, the narrow entrance, and the depth of the cave system together allowed the couple to go entirely undetected for the next 25 years. Living inside a cave without income created an immediate practical problem. Sawney needed to support himself and Agnes. Fishing would have been a straightforward solution given their location directly on the coast. Sawney chose a different approach. The roads running between nearby villages were regularly used by travellers, people on horseback, in wagons, moving alone or in small groups. Sawney began ambushing them at isolated points along those roads, taking money, jewellery, food, and whatever else they were carrying before disappearing back into the surrounding woodland. The arrangement worked for a period. Then Sawney began thinking about the risk he was taking. The crimes he was committing carried the death penalty if he was caught, and every person he robbed was a potential witness capable of identifying him. His solution was direct. No witnesses meant no identification. No identification meant no capture. Eliminating witnesses, however, created a secondary problem. Bodies left in the woods would prompt a search. Sawney thought through this as well and arrived at an approach that addressed multiple problems at once. He stopped trading stolen goods at local shops, a practice that had always carried the risk of recognition, and instead began bringing the bodies of his victims back to the cave. Agnes prepared them. The couple, who had been surviving on very little, suddenly had a reliable and high-protein food supply. With their physical condition improving, Sawney and Agnes began having children. They would eventually have 14, 8 sons and 6 daughters, all of whom were raised inside the cave and fed on whatever Sawney brought back from the roads above. As the children grew old enough, they joined their father on his operations. With more people involved, the clan was able to target larger groups of travellers, sometimes overwhelming parties of up to 6 people in a single ambush. Years passed. The children had children of their own, not with outside partners, but within the family. The group that had started as 2 eventually grew to 46 individuals, all of them living together in the cave system, and all of them participating in the attacks on travellers. The pattern of disappearances along the roads of Ayrshire did not go unnoticed by the surrounding communities. As the number of missing people accumulated, locals began looking for explanations and for someone to blame. Suspicion fell initially on innkeepers, since inns were typically the last places missing travellers had been seen. A significant number of innocent people were accused, tried, and executed for crimes they had nothing to do with. Not one of them confessed, because not one of them was responsible. As the wrongful executions continued without resolving the disappearances, attention shifted. Local authorities organised searches of the surrounding countryside and coastline, looking for evidence of some group operating outside the villages. The searches found nothing. On one occasion, a member of a search party actually located the entrance to Sawney Bean's cave and brought it to the attention of the others. The group looked at the narrow opening in the cliff and collectively concluded that no one could possibly be living inside a sea cave. They moved on. The family had by this point become almost entirely nocturnal, remaining in the cave through daylight hours and emerging after dark to hunt the roads. When they brought back more than the clan could consume immediately, the women preserved the excess by salting and pickling the meat. Limbs and other remains that could not be used were thrown into the ocean at the cave entrance. Before long, these pieces began washing ashore at nearby beaches, where locals discovered them and assumed the cause was some kind of animal. For 25 years, this continued without interruption. In the year 1600, the Bean clan made a mistake they had never made before. One evening after dark, a man and his wife were riding home from a local fair along one of the roads the clan had long used as hunting ground. The man was seated at the front of the horse. His wife rode behind him. The Beans came out of the darkness from multiple directions simultaneously. The women of the clan pulled the wife from the horse before she had any chance to react. The attack was immediate and savage. By the time she reached the ground, she was already fatally injured. Her husband, unlike the clan's previous victims, had combat training. He fought from horseback, drawing both a sword and a pistol, and managed to hold them off long enough for something the clan had never encountered. A large group of other travellers, also returning from the fair, came upon the scene. 20 to 30 people arrived and joined the confrontation. The Bean clan had never faced resistance of this scale. Recognizing they could not win, they retreated into the woods and returned to the cave. They had left behind a living witness for the first time. The surviving man was escorted all the way to Glasgow, where he brought his account directly to the chief magistrate. As the man described the attack, the number of attackers, their behaviour, the location, the magistrate began connecting it to the years of missing travellers and the body parts found on local beaches. The magistrate took the extraordinary step of bringing the man before King James IV, who had already been paying attention to the pattern of disappearances across Scotland and had developed a theory that witchcraft was the cause. The king listened to the full account, and within a short time had assembled a force of 400 soldiers and a pack of tracking hounds. The caravan headed for Ayrshire, growing in size as volunteers joined along the route, led by the man whose wife had been killed. When the search party reached the coastline near the cave, an initial sweep of the area turned up nothing. But as the group passed in front of the cave entrance, the hounds reacted violently, pulling against their leads and howling toward the rocky cliff. Someone inspected the opening and reported back. The king, who had already moved past it, turned around. From the outside, the entrance revealed nothing but darkness, but the dogs would not stop. Soldiers lit torches and entered the tunnel. The further they went, the stronger the smell became. When they reached the far end of the cave, approximately 1 mile from the entrance, they found the entire Bean clan waiting inside. The cave walls were hung with preserved body parts. Barrels used for pickling sat along the walls. Piles of clothing, jewellery and bones were stacked to one side. The scene was described by those present as resembling the interior of a butcher's storage. The clan attempted to fight when the shock passed. They were overwhelmed by numbers and quickly subdued. Every member of the family, men, women and children, was taken into custody and marched to a nearby village. King James IV chose not to involve the formal justice system. All 46 members of the Bean clan were sentenced to death and transported to Leith for execution the following day. The manner of execution was deliberately severe. The men were killed first in a prolonged and brutal fashion, while the women were forced to watch. The women were then executed by burning, the standard punishment applied to those convicted of witchcraft in that period. The Bean clan was gone. The obvious question, once you have heard the full account, is whether any of it is true. Historians have looked at this carefully, and the evidence is not encouraging for those who want to accept the story as fact. Researchers who have examined Scottish records, newspapers and private diaries from the period have found no documentation of a sustained pattern of disappearing travellers in Ayrshire. A discovery of 46 people living as cannibals in a cave and their subsequent mass execution would have been remarkable enough to appear in contemporary records. It does not. The earliest known written version of the Sawney Bean story has been traced to a publication called the Newgate Calendar, which was widely read during the 18th and 19th centuries. The calendar was known for presenting crime stories in a heavily sensationalized form, blending documented events with embellishment to maximize impact. Separating what was real from what was added in that publication is extremely difficult. Some historians argue that the story may be built on older, more fragmentary accounts. A figure from the 14th century, known as Christy Cleek, a butcher who reportedly turned to consuming human flesh during a severe famine and led a small group preying on travellers, has been cited as a possible source that later merged with other local legends. There is also a well-documented history of banditry and smuggling along the Ayrshire coastline, where coastal caves were regularly used as bases for criminal operations. The most likely explanation is that the Sawney Bean legend developed gradually, drawing from real criminal history, real locations, and real anxieties about lawlessness in rural Scotland, and was shaped over time into the version that eventually appeared in print and spread from there. Whether there was ever a real Sawney Bean remains genuinely uncertain. The cave, at least, is real. It is still there. The story of the Sawney Bean clan, true, partially true, or entirely invented, has endured for centuries. It inspired one of the defining horror films of the 20th century, and it continues to draw visitors to a cave on the Ayrshire coast that most people would walk straight past without a second glance. What do you think? Is there something real at the core of this story, or is it a legend built entirely from imagination and rumour? Drop your answer in the comments. If you made it to the end, thank you for watching Creepy Real Stories. Use the link in the description to submit a story suggestion, and subscribe if you want more. I will see you in the next one.